Hey there, everyone. This will just be a very quick sort of look at some early Terraria versions. I just decided to do this to check out YouTube Live and make sure everything with that is going to work okay. Just before we start doing the regular streams on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which will also be starting tomorrow, by the way. And while those will be fun, and I get to go through almost every version of Terraria, there's two very early versions of the game that are not going to be compatible with that particular goal. And those are Terraria's pre-alpha build that was leaked quite a few years ago now. Actually right before the game came out, about a month. And the Terraria beta, which was also leaked roughly a week before the game actually ended up coming out. It was a very, very early release of the game, as we will soon see. And yeah, that's pretty much it. We can go ahead and load up the game here and see exactly what we're getting into. Starting with the pre-alpha version. I'll have to load in here. Unfortunately, the setup here is going to be a little unusual, just because of the way things load, but here I am. If we head over here, and there we go. So this is the single earliest version of Terraria that is publicly available in any way, shape, or form. I actually spawned in a very large cave system this time. Usually, when you start this one up, you're just kind of over top here in the overworld. We will probably try to explore this a little bit, but in the meantime, let's grab a few quick materials. I will also go ahead and move up sound here. Another thing you'll notice, and this is also going to be a thing with the game, with the alpha and beta, I should say, that essentially whenever whether I accidentally or intentionally close off of the game at any point, you'll get this weird purple screen. That was fixed in 1.0, but in these early beta and alpha snapshots that we have, all two of them, that was not yet fixed. And there was still an issue where the game would simply just throw up a purple screen if it wasn't able to show you what you should be seeing. But yeah, that's essentially everything that is going on here. The music is also actually being dubbed in as of right now. This won't last too terribly long. I just set it to be like a 30-minute loop, so whenever the music is starting to fade out, we will probably just go ahead and leave the alpha version if we don't leave even earlier than that. But yeah, this version actually did not contain any music. It's just sound effects on my end. You're just able to hear it because you're on stream side. So as far as the actual mechanics you're able to use, obviously mining is still a thing. You don't have a copper short sword, which you didn't have in 1.0 either. I believe that was added in the very last version of 1.0 before 1.1's major update actually came out in 2012, I believe. And essentially, the major adjustment that was made there was just for melee purposes. The axe is really not a great first weapon. It is the bare minimum to get you by, even when slimes are pretty much the only thing traversing the map. And while you can chop down trees, you'll notice a pretty major adjustment has been made. So you can replace down blocks. You just saw me do it earlier. But as far as actually trying to place down wood, you can hear me clicking. But nothing will actually go. You cannot place down wood whatsoever. And as a matter of fact, some of the most basic and essential seeming crafting items inside the game are simply not present. You cannot create a crafting bench of any kind. No workbench existed in the game yet. Instead, literally everything that can be crafted is actually just from your character's internal inventory. You essentially have every crafting item unlocked into your character at all times. But it's pretty much significantly more limited than that sounds because of how few items are actually in this build. It's worth noting that this build was actually acquired, if I remember correctly. This build was essentially gained through the use of an extensive, basically rebuilding of the game files that Regedit had actually been posting during this time that you could still get from Relogic's official, I think, forums of the time. That you could actually get this that easily. It was not a hard thing to procure at the time, and of course has been widely spread to eventually the Internet Archive, and that's how I was able to pretty easily get it. At the time this came out, it was considered pretty a pretty major concern for Relogic. I mean, the game was only about a month away from coming out in what they were planning to be a significantly more finished state. The intended first build of Terraria to be released to the public would have probably been something in between what we would eventually know as 1.1 and 1.0. Essentially, they had to rush that because of the next one that came out that was a little bit more damaging to Terraria's representation at the time, as far as its overall public opinion was concerned. But you'll notice that for the most part, a lot of these assets would remain in to 1.0, and some of them would still remain up to 1.4 almost, although with some slight modifications and overall just improvements aesthetically to them. The sun sprite is the same as 1.0, grass, cobblestone, trees especially, that's a big one, are all the same. Slimes behave slightly differently, a little more aggressive. Obviously no health bars yet, that wouldn't come until 1.2, I think. And, of course, slopes. The entire world is entirely made of blockiness. There's no actual slopes into the way the world is generated. All of that would stay that way until 1.1. So, I have a little bit of gel now. And I have a little bit of wood, which means that I can craft torches. Not very many, though. I can also craft myself a wooden sword. Now, interestingly, you saw there that I was able to make a wooden door. So you can actually still craft some of the items that you would make at like a regular wooden crafting bench, but they just won't fully work. And that was actually something interesting. You might have just seen that for also this message. Yeah, two things that I didn't fully allude to. When you first boot up the game, it actually just starts out like in this part of the map. You don't create your character. It's wholly randomized. No real armor to be spoken of. And also, interestingly, is that there actually was still some translucence on the slimes. You can still see that a red and blue over top of each other create that purplish hue. It's actually something I wouldn't have expected from this early into the game, especially with how primitive the game's lighting was, even into 1.0. Still, we've got the old torch sprite, which was significantly less luminescent, and the somehow even stubbier than I remember wooden sword from this time. Still technically the best weapon I have available to me, but it's not great. This cave system is pretty robust, though. Most of the time when you load into this world, it can be pretty hard to find a cave system of note. If I had to guess, it's kind of designed to... Well, assuming it has any memory at all, it might actually be just completely random. That the more that you play, the more it will essentially try to trigger you into more complicated areas so that you'll have more stuff to do. But it seems like most of this cave system has been explored. There isn't a whole lot down here. You've also probably noticed that every single sound effect in the game is very limited, if it's there at all. The sound for just mining something is always going to be the equivalent of mining dirt blocks instead of any other material that you may be mining. It's still going to sound like dirt. I just mined some copper there, and it still played the exact same sound effect as it does for cobblestone, or as would actually be intended for dirt. And that's about it, really. It's a very, very, very early version of the game. But it is fascinating to see just how much there still was to be done by this point in development. And interestingly, there still were a couple, like, kind of minor details figured out here. Like, if you break the block below a torch here, it will latch to the side if you do break the block beneath it. I'm actually surprised to feature that kind of minute and quality of life-y was already fully working this early into development. But overall, the world's pretty barren here. There's not a whole lot that you can easily see, especially with early torches at this time. I'm very glad that, I believe it was 1.2, where these got heavily revamped and they now have a lot more luminance naturally to them. You can dig straight down, and you can try to search for things, but to my knowledge, very few biomes actually exist. I have seen gold ore in the world here before. Of course, back then it was just copper, silver, and gold. That's all you had. No tungsten. None of the other materials. Certainly none of the hard mode ores. And it seems to be pretty much everything that was down here. That's really kind of all there is to it. It's a very, very simple and early version of the game. I have no idea if it's actually practical to actually see the top of the world or try to find if there are sky islands above where you show up. To my knowledge, 1.0 did have sky islands, so it's not impossible. I believe the beta has them as well. So we will take a quick gander up there. And it is also nighttime, so the night cycle still works as intended. I have no idea if it has spawns that are normally exclusive to that time frame. I'm also not sure what the limit of world placement is. Let's see if we can reach it. We don't have that much dirt on us, but we can try. It is a very quiet experience to actually try to play the game when you don't have any other sound effects kind of guiding you at all. And that's pretty much all I've got. I did make it a fair ways up, though. I believe fall damage is still oh, no, it is not. There's no form of fall damage in this version. Oh, and as you can see, I can just immediately craft a bar just from ore, even though I have not made a furnace because there is no furnace in this particular build. As a matter of fact, I believe from my last death, I lost my spare vanity items that I can use as well to actually choose what I look like at this point in the game since, well, there was no character creator. Here's a yellow slime, a bit stronger than the rest. The sprites look slightly larger, but they're a little more samey between the slimes than they would be in just later builds of the game. Pretty normal stuff as far as that's concerned. Still a fairly arduous task. And slime was not a guaranteed drop at this time either. It was sometimes a very grueling experience. But there was one benefit. There is 0 cooldown to healing items. So that's something. You can replace down ores. I don't believe you could place bars. I think that was a much later inclusion. And that's about it. I'm just going to keep a torch on me as I kind of scour the underground. If I fall down somewhere, I'll have options. How am I doing? Largely just kind of ambling about in the dark a little bit. Trying to explore what you can with the limited resources. Kind of all there was to this very, very early version. I'll keep this on the very side. Keep things a little more traditional if we can. overall, yes, darkness is definitely your worst enemy in this very, very early version. And that's why that's not going to work. But, even outside of that, if we... I haven't seen any zombies or any other figures that would normally be from nighttime, so I don't think they were incorporated yet. In fact, it seems like a lot of the mechanics that we would later know the underground for really were not yet introduced. Or only existed in a very primitive state. Lacking fall damage is handy, though. It makes actually traversing a lot of this much easier. But overall, we just keep heading down. We should reach some kind of either secondary biome or possibly the underworld, but unfortunately, because there are just so few available upgrade paths by this point in the game, I don't think I've actually said, this build only has, it has less than 30 items. More than 20, but less than 30. Very, very few things can actually be gained in this particular build of the game because of just how early it is. Obviously, all the sprites are still placeholder, and that'll be present in the beta build as well. But that's really all there is to this version of the game. So, with that in mind, I think it's probably time to go ahead and switch over and take a look at what the other build has to offer. Because frankly, it has much, much more in it than this one does. Because it's far closer to what we would later know as 1.0. Also, I should note, there is pretty much no method of saving. There's no real equipment slots. That's the closest you get. And that's pretty much it. If you want to stop the game, you literally just exit out of the window. That's all you get. So, alright, we're going to take a very short minute to basically transfer over to the beta build, but it should only take a few seconds, but I am going to switch over to my standby. Let's see here. Okay, so, purple screen aside, let's load up Terraria's beta build. And as you can hear, I will turn off the other overworld music. We actually have proper music this time. So, I'm actually going to turn it down a little bit. I believe the setting is reset every time, but I'll keep it relatively low for convenience sake. While it does have a full screen mode, it'll automatically stretch your screen to basically attempt 4:3. I'm on an ultra-wide monitor right now. That does not end well, so we'll just be playing in windowed mode for the time being. It may or may not be the standard for even later streams. So there's no immediate option for just randomizing your character. Your default will always look like this, and as was the case at the time, there's only 3 hairstyles. We'll do hairstyle 2 to be different. As with this very, very early mechanic, you literally choose the individual values from 0 to 255 of what color you actually want things to be. It was not a great system. It was very hard to pinpoint things. This would be a massive change and fix for Terraria 1.2 to do. But until then, this was the way you design your character. We'll go with that. Yeah. We won't spend too long on this. Eyes are fine. I don't think that needs any change. Skin color, let's do something different. Full green, why not? clothes. So this one is actually slightly different than what we would later really associate with these sorts of things. Notably because you have the shirt, undershirt, and pants, which I believe is all the same even now, but there's also a miscellaneous slot, which is a little strange. And we'll take a look at that. Just adjusting again a little bit here. So the miscellaneous actually was replaced with boots later on. The only reason it's called miscellaneous is because now there is a belt on the character. Modern Terraria characters don't have belts in any way, shape, or form, so this is a pretty unusual and kind of surprising inclusion if you've never seen it before. But yeah, your belts and your shoes will always match in this version. It's pretty much the only way to get belts, I believe, unless there's some equipable item that can do it for you now. But that's pretty much it. You create your character. Chat, feel free to name the character. I can wait a little bit here. I do have the stream on a higher delay setting. I will probably lower that in the future. It's more than I thought it was. So yeah, in the meantime, I will just be either briefly watching chat here, or, you know what, unless there's anything immediately in the meantime, and keep in mind that it's almost about 10 seconds, my man knew. He already knew what I wanted for this character. Wumbo. It's truly the finest of character names. Yeah. Yeah, let's do it. Time to see the adventure of Wumbo. But now the question is, where does Wumbo live? Also, something that I just find kind of adorable about this build is that it'll literally just tell you what the world size is in megabytes as well. Like, oh my god, 500 megabytes for a world, are they crazy? It's like, it's just amazing to me that that was, like, such a big deal at the time to people. Whether it be during development or later on. It's worth noting as well that they did eventually replace this in 1.0. I think they finally removed it. But it's funny to me. I gotta admit. We'll just do a small world. No reason to do anything other than that. And I believe we have a world name over here in chat. Thank you, Sir King Rossman. What a guy. You should really check out his, he did a really good video on, I believe it's Interstate Drifter 2000. It's one of the best video essays that I think I've ever seen, so please go check that out. You'll also notice that world generation, just like 1.0, is extremely fast compared to modern. And now we're ready to go. So, one of the first things you'll notice about this current build of the game is, so the guide in this particular build actually does not have a name. It's completely nameless. His animation is slightly off kilter. Seems to just be missing some frames from it, but otherwise it's pretty close to how we would look in 1.0. But your character, however, still has the whole one leg thing going on. That was a weird quirk of the NES Final Fantasy game sprites, which heavily inspired and influenced what Terraria would look like early on. Although I think if this part of the sprite wasn't changed in 1.0, it was for everybody except the main character. But this particular beta build is much closer to what we would later know as Terraria 1.0. And that's because it was already a pretty late beta release for the game. Very few things weren't done yet compared to what 1.0 would actually become. But that's partially because when this leaked, Relogic's overall dev team kind of freaked out. The overall perception of the game was not great at the time because people were kind of expecting more and better performance out of the game at that time. And ultimately, it was just kind of that sort of limitation that forced them to crunch and release the game a little bit earlier than they had ever had planned. Because of that, there was kind of this requirement most of the team saw to, even if they couldn't include some of the things they wanted, like I think a big cut was a lot of content from the Underworld, most notably the boss of the Underworld, the final boss of pre-hard mode, was cut. And it's a distinct possibility that was meant to be the end of the game at one point. And in a way, as scary as I'm sure this was at the time, we might actually have this build to thank for Terraria even having the second half of its experience, which later became much more than that. At this point, it's most of the experience. It's pretty extraordinary. Alright, I don't want to stray too far before I actually build a little NPC village here. There isn't a whole lot you can really do with that at this point in time. Obviously, without corners, building fancier constructions is pretty much impossible, but we'll do a little bit here. You can place wood, a nice feature compared to the pre-alpha, which I guess if you tried to make a house at all, it was just going to be made of dirt. We'll be building a pretty small house here, but we will try to get at least one more gel. Oh, my modern Terraria influences are getting me again. As of Terraria 1.1, the game actually doesn't let you break even placed wood without an axe. It's a pretty strange decision to make, actually, but it does make for something kind of interesting compared to what we have now. Although I'm taking much more damage. And now the workbench is made standard, although it looks a little different than what you're probably used to. And for that matter, the doors that you make with it, at a glance, at least to me, they almost look closer to what we would later know as the living wood doors. They have a little bit less, like, kind of natural, like, vines over top of them, but besides that, they look very, very similar to the living wood doors. Very basic construction. Otherwise, a lot of the way things operate is not too different. House I made here is rather small, though. And really, the item pool still wasn't very big in this version. It was about 200. Obviously, that's a lot more than, like, somewhere in the 20s, but it's still not a lot, all things considered. And the last thing that I wanted to craft is a sword. It's also worth noting, because I know in Chippy Gaming's video he mentions this as well, where if you try to create a wooden bow, you can, but you can't craft arrows, so it's pretty much worthless until nightfall. Or actually, I don't know why I'm thinking because of nightfall. No, it's from the merchant. Coin drops also looked far less dynamic at this point in time, and you got very little money from killing enemies. And that's pretty much all you had very early on. The guide's early dialogue is still pretty much the same as you would know now. Still not much of an influence, especially really before 1.4. The guide was very close to useless, to the point that it became a bit of a meme by the time the Wall of Flesh came about. Acorns now exist for chopping down trees. I see a gemstone down there, which is actually very useful by this point. I believe I don't know if this was changed in 1.1 or not, but for 1.0 in the beta build, gemstones really don't have any direct purpose for crafting. You're basically just meant to sell them to the merchant for pretty high prices. And high prices they do go for. You can very quickly rack up more than enough money to get a mini shark when that becomes available. Unfortunately, this build of the game is definitely missing a few key things as far as normal progression and money making goes. Also noteworthy is that this very early sprite for silver is easy to just not detect. Very glad that some of these sprites would later be heavily overhauled, and again, I feel like I've been talking about 1.2 a lot actually during these. It really was a very influential update. Like 1.1 was much closer to essentially what they wanted 1.0 to be, with a little bit of extra stuff in the form of like early hard mode. But then 1.2 was like the big overhaul. It was the biggest content patch the game has ever received, to my knowledge, albeit not necessarily the single most important. Just have these enormous trees that are just so much taller than you could ever possibly see them in the game. It's pretty amusing, honestly. Truth be told, it really isn't a whole lot to this one. It really is very, very close to what we would later see in 1.0. At least on the face of it. But there are a couple things that we may notice that have changed here shortly. So desert did exist. As you just saw, there were some sand blocks there, but not a full desert. Desert biomes could spawn. They were a thing. Purple slimes on the overworld is kind of interesting. Is that a thing now? I don't know if it is. I think those might be dungeon exclusive for the most part. That are quite rare. Cobblestone was a common sight in deserts at this time. They were also very, very small environments for the most part, it seems. Although that might just be an oddity of the way this world happened to generate. Pots existed, and I believe there can even be chests in some of these. But to really take advantage of that, you need a good mine shaft to explore. It doesn't seem like I have much in the way of that, but I will get the iron from here. I should also probably go ahead and get some cobblestone, because crafting equipment is still important to this build. Unlike in the alpha, where you essentially, everything is crafted just via the character, and that's kind of the end of it. Not in this version. By this point in development, they had figured out how they wanted crafting to be, for the most part. Although not everything has received full inclusion, as we will take a look at later on. Very cool. So while wood can be placed, it's worth noting that not only do you need a workbench to actually make platforms, but I believe the platforms are a 1-to-1 craft ratio. Which essentially just means that they're really a not very appealing value, especially to an early player. Getting early armor can also be a rather painful experience. Sand did have gravity at this point. seems to be about that. Conserving torches was definitely much more important by this point. And here we have entered, interestingly, a hybrid of the what we later know as the corruption. Although it seems to be playing the Crimson music, it sounds like. That's pretty crazy, actually. I've always associated the corruption with a very different music track. This is what I would normally hear in the Crimson, I believe. Well, it might just be random, but that's that. Oh, I see. I perhaps didn't build this house with the greatest of foresight because of that, but I guess we're just going to build one into the ground a little bit. Not a huge deal, I guess. We'll actually just basically keep the doors that way. And we'll just kind of build underneath here so that we can just kind of do this. Yeah, tools used to be pretty obtuse, actually, in Terraria. It was kind of a problem for the early game. Also, actually, yeah, that's kind of better in some regards, I'm realizing. Why haven't I been doing this beforehand? Let's see, what else can we craft? Furnace, that's a big one. And I'm quite a big fan of this early furnace sprite. I don't know about you guys, but I really would like to see this come back in some way, some like alternative design you can pick from. It's pretty nice. You'll notice that the coloration was also introduced at this point, which is pretty nice. Although I didn't find any gold ore in the pre-alpha, it does not have any unique coloration to it. So yeah, we can actually craft a little bit of silver. 5 bars ain't too shabby. 5 bars of that. Didn't mean to do that, but it's pretty easy to craft it back. I believe I need 1 gold in my inventory to get the merchant to spawn. I don't think that's changed. As far as crafting chests, you can, although it's rather expensive, and I can get them in the underground. Depending on how early I want the merchant, though, it's probably a good idea. Gray bricks and glass were both introduced still, so there are still quite a few items in here, even though the overall tally is only about, it's in the 200s, it's not even 300. Okay. Well, considering the lack of other options I really have here, we'll just kind of create a bit of a tunnel. Actually, you know what? We'll do this kind of inside of the house. I'm realizing that if I just build some compatible housing here by using platforms. So again, platforms were not great at this time because there's that 2-to-1 thing, but they'll work. Checking housing was also a little bit more kind of intimidating at the time, but there were options. So I'm not going to play this version for all too long. I'll see if I can get to the underground to show off some quirks of the way things were at that time. Maybe show off some early armor, since it does look different. But to be honest, the beta's pretty well documented. I really don't have a lot to show off that's new until we get into attempts to play the game, updating every time we essentially end progression, which will be the later plan for all of this, and really what this is all in preparation for. We'll have to craft a bench. Again, rather inconvenient, but not impossible to work around. Okay. Even some of the more convenient aspects of platforms were not yet introduced exactly. And yeah, we're dealing with the world pre-ropes for Terraria, which is a pretty rough time to be in. It's one of those things that's pretty hard to go back to a version of the game where you do not possess them. I also hear plenty of monster noises, but I haven't actually encountered any night creatures yet. Here we have some gemstones. Seem to always be in small quantities, but they sell for very, very high prices to the merchant. Here we go. Some new music. Or, well, okay, it was for a second there. Gotta get this copper. Then we can enjoy the new music. Yeah, copper was actually really important to early Terraria before wooden armor and cactus armor became kind of the norm for what an early player would do. Yeah, man, a lot of gems early on, actually. And that's not a small yield for a time before, like, gem caves and larger veins of stuff would become the norm. I don't see a whole lot past there, but we'll take a look. It's still... More things change, the more they stay the same, right? Terraria is still much about digging and traversing the underground early on. That much really hasn't changed, arguably since the pre-alpha, but certainly from here on. Water behaved a little weird. One of the things we haven't really seen much is that slimes really ignore water oftentimes. They aren't very heavily affected by it, like, at all. And also, as this is pre-1.3, water did not behave normally at all. It was very strange. It was not fun to deal with. Still not particularly fun to deal with, frankly. Oddly clean kind of fade outs for how early a lot of this stuff was. Oh, that's a very large vein of amethyst, it looks like. I've been more successful getting gems this time than actually just getting more regular amounts of things. And as you can see, yeah, water behaved very strangely back then. It was a very unusual beast to kind of tame at that time. Fortunately, I've had some pretty good luck getting silver, as well as... honestly, yeah, in terms of ores, I've really only gotten silver. I haven't seen any gold at all, I don't think. It's possible I've missed it. Plenty of gems and silver, though, which is enough to get you pretty far, especially if you can somehow make it through into getting the arms dealer. Worth noting as well, I do have a single bomb in my inventory, so I could probably get the demolitionist as well. I also have no idea how effective fall damage is in this version. I believe it does exist, though, which can make traversing some of these early caves pretty scary if you don't know what you're doing. Oh yeah, no torch placement on platforms. Could be pretty archaic in that regard. I don't know if I can get fully onto that platform or not. There we go. Oh, I see some gold peeking back there. But yeah, as you can see, a lot of this really... I mean, oftentimes I've been comparing this to 1.0, but really 1.1 did not change a lot about the pre-hard mode Terraria experience. So really, for the first few years of Terraria's existence, this was what pre-hard mode was like. But yeah, the only reason I'm actually playing these is just kind of to show them off. For what I later plan to do for Terraria, I really can't use stuff. I definitely can't use stuff from the pre-alpha, but I don't think I can use anything from this beta build either. Usually it'll throw up incompatible world files, characters will throw up errors, because they were just made in a very different fashion back then. A lot of it probably could be made more compatible if Terraria ever kind of modernized the way their game launcher system works, the same way that Minecraft eventually did, to where you can play like just about any snapshot of that game up to before it was even publicly available or heard of. But I digress. One of the more odd things that you'll notice is that it's pretty rare that you're even really told that you got an item drop from an enemy. It's pretty unusual, actually, the way all that operates. I saw there was a system down here. Torches. I think I can make at least one more batch, but I'll probably need to be a little more conservative with these. Getting back up is a lot harder than getting down in the world of Terraria. Now it kind of becomes the ancient method of kind of shuffling back and forth as you... I mean, essentially what I'm doing is elevating, and I can probably reverse engineer this into a elevator later, depending on how far this actually gets me. So far, it seems to be going quite a long ways. First case of frame stuttering. I believe the counter in the bottom left is a frame counter, but I'm not sure. Giant worms still exist at this point in time, and are rather tough to kill, even in this kind of environment, where it's actually probably easier to kill them than normal. Without a health bar, it can be pretty hard to tell how much health they even have. Fun fact, when my sister was first playing Terraria, she was probably playing in version 1.1, considering how early this was. She actually quit the game the first time she saw the giant worm. She did not want that from her Terraria. And unfortunately, no peaceful mode exists, so that was kind of it for her. But yeah, she technically played this game before even I did. Starting to get a little worried. I don't really have a way back home. I haven't even really experienced any fall damage yet. I might really be fighting blind here for a little bit. I really should have made some more NPC housing before going down here. I could probably have the merchant by now, and the demolitionist. If he's in the game. I think he is at this point. But I'm not totally sure. Let's see. I see some... Well, I hear something kind of ambling around. I'm definitely in the lower part of the underground at this point. Unfortunately, I seem to not really have any gel on me. Hey Jerem. How goes it? Apologies for the stream delay. It's one of the big things that I'm getting used to here on the YouTube side of things. Just really not a big fan of the way Twitch has been operating. Decided to try something different. Marking time waiting for death here. Yeah, that's that. Unfortunate, but the worst I lose is a little bit of money, and actually I'm not even sure if that was incorporated yet in this ancient build of the game. Let's see. No, I've still got my 14 silver. I think that's everything I had beforehand. And now I have enough iron, and hopefully enough copper too, and silver, to justify kind of building a chest, since I didn't really come across one, unfortunately. As well as an anvil. So now that's pretty much the norm. Oh, nice. Do tell, what's the next vid about? Apologies for the staggered audio if you're watching the VOD on playback. Yeah, the stream delay for this one was definitely a lot longer than what I'll be doing later on. Battery level is critical on my mouse. Fun. I'll need to manage that here shortly. I can do that very, very quickly here. There we go. Mouse is plugged in, should be good to go. Rad. Okay. This house is very small, so I should probably consider increasing the height of it. But my usual Terraria instincts are still against me here. Okay. Let's build a couple more platforms here, as well as an anvil. Actually, we already had platforms. I'm blind, apparently. Let's see. Let's put these here. All good. Now I can finally craft things. Now, I know later on you could actually break heart crystals with a pickaxe, but I know for a fact that you do need a hammer in later builds. I believe Chippy mentioned that you needed a silver hammer, but we're gonna try a copper hammer. If that doesn't work, we can craft something higher end. But we can also You can see that we can already build silver greaves. They just kind of look like a silver pair of pants, funnily enough. And you can also build an iron chain, which I think is only used for like a very small set of niche crafting things, and that's kind of it. You could also do the brick materials out of cobblestone and ore at this point in time. As far as what I'm looking for damage and such, I think I am going to go ahead and make a golden broadsword to start out. It's probably worth it for early on. Good melee weapons can be rather hard to come by, and it's basically the same cost, even though it is pretty much all of my gold. I wasn't planning to make gold armor anyway. Plus, this might be sellable. Oh yeah, lesser healing potions restore 100 life in this version instead of 50. I believe that's a 1.0 thing as well. Pretty crazy. Swings much faster too. I think this is faster than modern. I guess it makes sense since the curve for weapons is a little different now. Mechanically, the state of well, I guess I should just say that the strongest weapon in this version of the game is pretty much just the the mini shark. That's about where things kind of cap off. And we're probably just going to cap things off there. We'll build like another secondary tower and then kind of bridge them. It's probably a good way to do it. Of course, this was quite a long ways off from what we would later consider the norm as far as the importance of where your NPCs went. Actually, I will need 2 tables and 2 chairs, won't I? Tables also did look slightly different at this point. Not gonna lie, that does look very silly, but I'm going to run with it. They look far more plain, even compared to modern Terraria, where the whole point is that they look more plain until you get the sawmill. But they are functional. They work. Then I will need a little bit more wall. Running low on wood, actually. Hopefully I don't need too much more. And then I will make some of this, and actually, as soon as I'm done with wall, I will turn some of it back into regular wood for the use of torches. Because I believe that was doable at this time. Go. Then we can we'll actually go out exploring a little bit here. Chop down some more trees. We can actually do pretty well against zombies. Golden swords are much more powerful at this time, honestly. And that's pretty much it for this point. I am going a little bit over from what I intended, but to be honest, I think I at least want to see the dungeon and fight Skeletron for a little bit, and if, for that matter, I actually do want to see the arms dealer and some of the other early sprites, as they were very different. They're one of the most different things about this version of the game compared to 1.0 and every version that came after. Unfortunately, while you can get all the things that would normally be used to create the spawner for the Eye of Cthulhu, there are no demon altars in this version of the game. So your options are actually very limited in terms of essentially what bosses you were able to fight. The only one that you have any ability to fight at all is Skeletron, and he is essentially designed to be impossible. He has pretty much infinite defense, requiring a solid, I think, 4,400 mini shark shots to hit his head before you'd be able to beat him, which is pretty much impossible. I don't even know if it's possible through tasks. I don't know if anybody's tried. It doesn't do much for you, though, because the whole reason they did that in the first place was because the dungeon was very incomplete at this point. Well, I guess we can go back to spelunking for a little bit. I'm not too worried about chests yet. Now that we have some viable housing, we can wait for a little bit. Okay, so fall damage is a thing in this version, as opposed to pre-alpha. Makes sense, I suppose, but it does mean we're going to use a lot of wooden platforms to get back to wherever I was. Not the end of the world, but we'll have to keep that in mind. Also, I am going to go ahead and make a chest, actually. There's enough good stuff here. That's probably worth actually just preserving up here and managing that way. Especially these here gemstones. I will need those rather soon. Interestingly, some of the early items actually ended at 250 for how many of them you could have. It's rather odd that that was the standard at the time, but that's how it went. Okay. I do have some arrows now, but not many. So maybe you actually could get them from night creatures or something. I don't know. And then... oh yeah, there is no trash. You would have to actually get rid of your items by directly throwing them into lava or something, if you actually wanted them gone. Pretty crazy, actually. Well, I definitely have good enough wares now, hopefully, if I can kind of boost my overall money up, I can get a merchant. That's about all there is to this one, so we can head back down. It is nice to have iconic Terraria music still plenty available by this point. Wait, how do... I don't know how you got rid of platforms before this version. That's quirky. and also makes this distinctly more wasteful than I thought it was going to be. Yeah, I don't know what happens there. That fall damage seems significant, so there might be some kind of damaging object that I'm landing on. Because 150 is a lot for that, even. Seems like there's a ton of giant worms down there, but they just can't reach me for some reason. Yeah, that's the highest they can go. That's really unusual. I've never seen that before. I will take it. So there must be like a ton of open space down there at the bottom for them to be able to move that far up and not reach enough blocks to keep going. Pretty unusual world generation, even for this time. The most boring part of Terraria in many ways. It's very grindy. It can take very long to actually get enough to make what you want. I kind of wish that it was just easier to, kind of craft objects in general. You know, you can kind of reduce the grindiness of the game by making it so that you don't have to do this. Eventually, that would be partially done in some of the later builds. Like, 1.4 lets you get around that a little bit, but it's still rather prevalent and pretty iconic to the game, even. But I don't see anything too special that way, so let's actually head back up. It's probably going to be it for a little while. Okay. Yeah, I think I'm gonna go ahead and tune it off here. Most of the other stuff that I would want to see in this later, you can actually check out a pretty good slew of videos discussing the early beta. It is fun to play, but there really isn't a whole lot of expandability to it or anything. So instead, we'll go ahead and tune off here, and tomorrow, guys, you'll actually be able to see me play 1.0. And not only that, but once I complete as far as I can into 1.0, I will transfer my world into 1.1. Well, that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the stream. But I'll see you guys next time.